You've passed go. What does retirement look like? This is More Than Money on News Talk 770.
Welcome back. You're listening to News Talk 770 and More Than Money. You're here with Dave Popowich, my co-host Faisal Karmali, off today on vacation, enjoying himself down south, I think doing a little golfing, the lucky guy. But I've got a terrific guest here to help us through the second segment, John Richardson, who's a Toronto attorney. He's an expert in U.S. tax and citizenship matters, also co-chairs the Alliance for the Defense of Canadian Sovereignty. We talk often on the show about the impact of some of the recent changes and the focus of the IRS for anybody that's a U.S. citizen that lives here or perhaps is married. There's some broad-reaching impacts here, and we're going to get John's take on this. But before we get to that, I want to remind you that we have our upcoming seminar. It's going to be on Wednesday, October the 22nd at 7 p.m. We're hosting that at the Oak Ridge Co-op Wine and Spirits. We're going to be talking, as always, about the transition to retirement or living in retirement and how to position properly your portfolio and the lifestyle changes that you can expect. To join us for that, give us a call at 966-8400, 966-8400, or you can register online at our website, morethanmoneyradio.com. John, I want to welcome you to the show.
Well, thanks very much.
So we've got a big problem. Well, at least anybody that's related to, married to, is a U.S. citizen, has a big problem here with what's going on with the IRS and tax and being connected to the United States. I want to just broadly start with your take on what people need to be concerned about and worried about, and then we'll deal with some of the specific issues I think that are passionate to you.
Sure. Well, in general, the bottom line is that if somebody's born in the U.S., they are under U.S. law, a U.S. citizen, and U.S. law takes the position that citizens have to pay tax regardless of where they live in the world, regardless of where the money is made, and they have to pay tax exactly the same way according to the same laws as U.S. residents. So, big issue for people.
Well, and let's define that, because a lot of people are saying, well, maybe I was born in the United States, I've never lived there. I mean, this is a pretty broad-reaching issue. So maybe give us the perspective of how far and broad this is. So for anybody that's listening, if you fall into this category, and then we'll talk about some of what needs to be done and the consequences of not doing that.
Well, I hope your listeners are sitting down, because although the U.S. calls this citizenship-based taxation, I think that's highly misleading. It's actually taxation based on place of birth.
Right.
In other words, you're born in the United States. The U.S. will follow you around for taxes wherever you live in the world, unless you take steps to terminate that citizenship. So what we have in Canada, and I work with these people all the time, are people who were, they were told they were born in the United States. They were told they came back to Canada at 3 months of age or something, never even knew they were U.S. citizens, and now with all the publicity, they're in the position of being told they're supposed to be U.S. tax compliant, have never filed a return, have no idea how to do it, and if they were to do it, it'd be incredibly expensive.
See, and that's the problem. That's right. If you're not connected to the United States in any way, but you fall into that category, and even some Canadians can get trapped into this, and I'll ask you about that in just a second. The problem is if you have to go back from the time you were of age and majority or, working age and have to file all these things, what can somebody expect, even if they're under the plans right now where the U.S. government gives you a pass, right? Just get it done. We'll give you a pass, and most people really won't owe any taxes. But it's expensive to do that. What can somebody expect in terms of cost if they want to get caught up?
Well, first of all, it depends what you mean by getting caught up. There's a program at the moment that's called Streamline Compliance, which I'm talking about. I'm not recommending. I'm going to take a position on whether to use it or not. But in a case like that, it would be going back for 3 years. What would the cost be? Well, it depends on the complexity of the situation, because remember, the filing includes the obligation to pay back taxes for those years,
right,
which for some people are absolutely nothing. For large numbers of people can be huge, huge amounts of money, because there are incompatibilities between the Canadian and U.S. tax systems. For example, if you have a Canadian-controlled private corporation, look for trouble.
Right.
Mutual funds, look for trouble, etc. So the cost depends on the complexity. It could be anywhere from probably a couple of $1,000s up to 6 figures.
Yeah.
Depending on who the person is. But the first step would be absolutely do not start with this as a tax issue. This is so important. It's first a citizenship issue. If you were born in the U.S., you begin life as a U.S. citizen, but there are many reasons that you could have relinquished it along the way. So first, make it a citizenship question. Second, if it turns out you are a citizen, consider how to comply. And third, make it a tax issue. That's the last thing you do.
So how does somebody go about determining whether or not they're a U.S. citizen if they're not actually sure?
Well, I'll plug myself. Consult a citizenship lawyer.
Yep.
There are U.S. law. Basically, here's the bottom line. If you're born in the U.S., you begin with U.S. citizenship, which you can lose if you've performed a relinquishing act. Now, that would include, for example, possibly becoming a citizen of Canada, possibly government employment, but there are other issues, mostly that revolve around your intent when you did those things. If you're not born in the U.S., you do not begin life with a presumption of U.S. citizenship, regardless of who your parents are. There are additional facts that need to be determined. So the first step is born in the U.S. or not. If born in the U.S., look for reasons you've lost it. If not born in the U.S., then look for reasons why the conditions you need have not been established.
So the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, right, FATCA, this is a U.S. law, and it's become effective in July of this year. Tell us a little bit about what that is and why it's important.
Well, what FATCA is the tool to enforce taxation on people who the U.S. deems to be U.S. citizens. Now, I would add that under FATCA, the U.S. can always redefine who a U.S. citizen is. So, for example, somebody could go to sleep being not a U.S. citizen, might wake up the next morning, according to U.S. law, being a U.S. citizen. Basically, what it means is under FATCA and as a result of Canada's acquiescence in FATCA, that is agreement to participate, Canadian banks are going to be rooting through their databases, looking for people who the U.S. in its sole discretion defines as U.S. citizens, and turning their information over to the Canada Revenue Agency, who will in turn forward it directly to the IRS, essentially meaning that this is going to be a problem they're going to have to deal with. Now, that is a broad, I think, oversimplification. The rules are complicated. My guess is a lot of people will end up being able to stay under the radar, no problem, because of the conditions under which accounts have to be reported, et cetera. But in a nutshell, that's what's happening. Worldwide hunt for anybody the U.S. considers to be a citizen to turn them over to the IRS.
I gather by the tone of your voice that you're not very pleased with this, and the fact that you're the co-chair of the Alliance for the Defense of Canadian Sovereignty. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing through this alliance and what you're trying to protect.
Yeah, we're not pleased with it at all. Well, the bottom line is simply this. As you point out, FATCA is a U.S. law, but that doesn't mean that the government of Canada has to implement that U.S. law in Canada. The Harper government has made an agreement with the United States where provisions of Canadian law have been changed to essentially force banks to go out and looking for U.S. citizens. The Alliance for the Defense of Canadian Sovereignty is challenging the conduct of the government of Canada in changing its laws to go along with a U.S. law, that is to impose the U.S. FATCA law on Canadian soil. The arguments are partially based on sovereignty. In other words, imagine a situation where Canada simply allows a U.S. law to take precedence over Canadian law. The bottom line is what the Harper government has agreed to let the IRS commissioner replace the governor general in the House of Commons. It's that extreme. Secondly, the case is based on a number of violations of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. For example, citizenship, national origin discrimination is prohibited under the Charter. This targets only people who the U.S. deems to be U.S. citizens or born in the U.S. Violations of search and seizure provisions. Basically, this is a search, a seizure without any evidence whatsoever of any reason to do that. And there are some more technical allegations as well. But the bottom line is that it's our goal to get the courts to rule that the government of Canada does not have the jurisdiction to have entered into this agreement with the U.S. Treasury.
Okay. We're going to have to take a quick break here. I'm afraid we're going to have to get you back on the show again because I think there's enough interest and there's enough complexity here that we're going to have to talk a little bit about, as you said, those steps, right? Talk about citizenship first and work back down through to the tax issue. I think we need to explore this a little bit more, but unfortunately we've run out of time to do it today. We've been with John Richardson. He's a Toronto attorney, an expert in U.S. tax and citizenship matters, also the co-chair of the Alliance for the Defense of Canadian Sovereignty.